If you haven't been living under a rock for the past 2 years, you've probably noticed a surge in the popularity of anime on a very niche streaming site known as Netflix. The series that is most commonly associated with this trend is Devilman Cryababy. And for good reason. The show is fantastic, albeit not for the faint of heart. Like seriously, this shit goes from a shonen monster of the week cake with hentai topping to a full-on existential crisis in what feels like one episode. Anyway, I'm getting off track. It's a modern-day adaptation of a manga that served as inspiration for many shows that are now considered to be a cult classic. Apart from the show's excellent animation, voice acting, and soundtrack, my god, the soundtrack. There are of course other factors that contributed to Devilman's success, notably PewDiePie making this video, the promotional campaign, and most importantly I think the notion of there being an anime funded and endorsed by Netflix, a platform which up to that point had as much in common with anime as 2020 has with being a good year for pretty much anyone, with a few exceptions here and there. And well, one of those exceptions is The Great Pretender. When I first heard another Netflix original anime was slated to release this year, I was pretty about it. I mean, sure, Devilman was great, Dorohedoro was good, and Kakaguri was, whatever the fuck Kakaguri was, not showing that here. I went into this anime completely blind. I didn't see the trailer, I didn't read the synopsis. Hell, the only thing I did know about it was that it had Freddie Mercury's song as the ED. And as expected, I binged the first 14 available episodes in 2 days and watched the rest in 3. In my opinion, this show is definitely one of the best Netflix original anime out there currently, let alone it being one of the best anime out this year, probably. Now, I may seem like an overly zealous salesman that is trying to sell you a product that doesn't even exist in the first place, so let's get into the thick of things, shall we? The story opens with our hero, Edamura Makoto, a Japanese low-level swindler that's out to scam tourists and the unsuspecting elderly. Okay, I'm making it sound way worse than it actually is, but just bear with me. One day, whilst perusing the back alley streets of Tokyo, he stumbles upon what he thinks is another clueless tourist. He stealthily becomes the new owner of the light-haired foreigner's wallet without realizing that he himself had been pickpocketed. The police get involved, but our hero manages to escape the heat, jumping into a cab with the dashing blonde scammer right next to him. Dead set on getting his money back, Edamura follows him to LA, where when stuck in a traffic jam, notices that the stranger is in the same line of work as him, and proposes a wager. If he manages to sell the fakes in a duffel bag behind him for more, he'll get his money back, plus keep the earnings. If not, he'll become the smooth-talking foreigner's assistant. The mysterious swindler introduces himself as Laurel, and they're off to the job. When Laurel is busy showing their targets, a Hollywood mafia boss named Eddie Casano, the goods, we're introduced to the crew's third member, Abby. The blonde fox's presentation of the non-existing drug's power, with the help of Abby, trumps any ideas Edamura had of doing it his own way. After Lauren persuades Eddie to buy, Abby and Edamura get acquainted with one another, and the trio begins their con job. That's pretty much as far as I can go without spoiling the finer points of the story or the characters. All in all, this may sound like a pretty standard heist or con job you'd see anywhere else. Ocean's 11, Focus, or The Italian Job all fit the bill. What makes this show special, however, are the characters, the personalities, struggles, dynamics, and personal arcs that play alongside the main story. Let's talk about them more. As with all good stories, having well-written characters is paramount. As a writer, you need to establish a strong connection between the audience and the characters that they're supposed to be rooting for, or else any semblance of tension may simply vanish because they simply won't care what happens to said characters. The Great Pretender's character writing is strictly interwoven with the show's plot structure. While that itself may not seem that impressive, the way it's implemented proves otherwise. The story is presented to us in separate arcs, renamed as cases, with each arc having its own separate episode title card, setting, and plot. What's more is that each of these cases also focus on delving deeper into a particular character's backstory. These subplots all highlight a problem that the character in the limelight is dealing with, and show how the character in question overcomes that problem, which leads them to grow as a person. Events happen and circumstances occur so that both the plot and character flourish and evolve, ending in either a cathartic cacophony of chaotic closure or a calm, calculated melody of acceptance, finishing the arc and cementing the person's progress as a character. What the fuck am I on about? Anyway, let's take Edamura as an example. As mentioned before, when we first meet him, he's shown to us as a young, competent, and seemingly devoid of morals con man, with his eyes set on earning his living through scamming and deceiving others. Pretty standard quasi-anti-hero stuff, right? Well, throughout the course of the arc, we're drip-fed information about him and his past. We learn that he's overly confident, yet when confronted with actual danger, incredibly fearful, has a strange fascination with collectible capsule toys, and is able to adapt to a situation when it demands it by brewing a wholly new plan by himself. With a few holes in said plan, but let's gloss over that. We learn of his past through a series of flashbacks? I can't really tell. Sometimes they happen in his dream, sometimes when he's daydreaming, and sometimes he's completely unaware of it, making it seem as if those brief flashes of the past were put there specifically for us, the audience, so that we can have a better understanding as to what kind of person he is. And this method isn't just used with Edamura, every single cast member gets this treatment. Where was I? Oh, right. We learn more about how he ended up being in the line of work that he is, about how his naivety led him to be imprisoned for working for a fraudulent company without realizing it. We learn that his mother is sick and pretty much the only one by his side, and the only one that seems to believe that Edamura is actually innocent. And just as life seems to be constantly lobbing logs at his feet, mostly in the form of being unable to find a job due to his falsified criminal record, she passes away, leaving him completely alone. At last, we're introduced to the root of his problems, the cause as to why he wasn't able to just keep on trying and decided to follow the con man lifestyle. You see, the person that he looked up to as a kid the most was his dad, a lawyer and what seemed like to him a paragon of just morals, righteousness, and overall good. That is why, when news of his father's involvement with human trafficking came, his world quite literally collapsed. His dad was sentenced to jail, and after release, never came back home. From that point on, he felt that no matter what he did, his dad's shadow would always follow him, a presence looming over him, tainting every single pure-spirited action he took. In the end, he gives up and embraces the saying that he had been hearing all too often all this time. Like father, like son. Yet despite this, he still feels that he's living a borrowed life, that it's not actually him that's responsible for all the cons he's done. As the story unfolds, he's reminded not only of his past through other people, but also the fact that it is in fact him that chose this path, a path that with each step seems more and more terrifying to him. At the end of the arc, he shows that he's grown. Having been recognized as a competent con man, he finally realizes that his choices led him to where he is now, and takes responsibility for his life and actions. All of this sounds rather serious, and that's because it is. The series isn't afraid of kicking you in the dick when it wants to, with some pretty sad and heartfelt moments. Yet despite this, manages to put on a facade so bright and colorful that it manages to fool the viewer into thinking that this show is something much more lighthearted than it actually is. Speaking of that facade, by all means, I'm no specialist when it comes to anime or arts in general, especially when it comes to the latter. I have a severe case of monkey brain when it comes to appreciating the finer points in visual art. Despite this, when I finished the first episode, I was blown away. Literally, I had to stop to collect my thoughts about what I had just seen. The amount of visual flair and talent that's on display is simply mesmerizing. Everything from how the world looks with its almost impressionistic feel that changes its palette in accordance with the emotions of the characters on screen, to the overly angular and exaggerated character designs, is simply sublime and a joy to look at. Combine those things with great framing and gorgeously smooth animation, and you've got one hell of a visual treat. If that wasn't good enough, you also have to keep in mind the absolute banger of a soundtrack that composer Yutaka Yamada crafted. I've never once in my life gone out of my way to listen to jazz, but my god did I get the feeling that I had been missing out. It superbly complements the action, giving the show a refreshing, jazzy and funky feel. I'm certain that without it, the show would have suffered greatly and wouldn't have had the same personality. Having said all of this, I think the true ace up the Great Pretender's sleeve, in my opinion, is something else entirely. I don't want to downplay the importance of the characters, story, premise and presentation that make this show what it is, but I just think that there is one other thing that makes this series really remarkable. To me at least. This anime doesn't really feel like an anime. There, I said it. I fucking said it. Alright, put the pitchforks down, just hear me out. When you think of heist, con job, and hell, even generic spy films as a whole, you come to realize that all these movies boil down to just one thing. A constant fight of one-upping one another. Here's how it usually goes. The protagonist and his crew come up with a plan for the job. They set out to fulfill that plan, but their adversary put their plan in place to thwart the protagonist's efforts. The protagonist feigns surprise and says "nuh-uh," revealing that being thwarted by the villain was part of their plan all along. This cycle can, in accordance to the writer's will, stop right then and there or continue, perpetuating the constant dance of one-upsmanship and scheming. Now let's look at the anime side of things. One thing that anime is exceptionally good at is over-exaggerating everything into oblivion and making it all seem ridiculously over the top. Giant mechas fighting whatever figment of the writers' and animators' imagination that appeared before them when they were high off their ass? Easy. Teenagers smacking the ever-living shit out of each other and demons whilst finding the meaning of life and sacrifice by training so hard that they can finally cave their enemy's skull in with a single punch? A walk in the park. A generic nobody being transported to another world where practically every girl he meets fawns over him like he's the perfect human specimen, while he saves the world using a power system that makes less sense than this entire fucking video. Oh, we got those in fucking spades, my guy. I'm not saying that anime can't be serious. Of course it can, and if it wants to, it can do so really damn well. It's just that anime doesn't hesitate as much when cranking the ridiculousness gauge up to 11 and just rolling with it. And there's nothing wrong with that. Now, if we combine the over-exaggeration with the aforementioned one-upping contest, we get one hell of a combination. The constant battle of one-upsmanship is taken to new heights when let off the leash, which anime readily does. This leaves the writers with much more room for creativity for how they're gonna plan out the story beats and characters, making the show all the more interesting to watch because you just don't know what the madmen responsible for writing it are gonna come up with next. The things they do in this show are batshit insane, but all of them feel like an evolution of the crazy stuff they already do in live-action equivalents of this genre. Ideas that the studios making said live-action films thought to be too risky or downright impossible to make reality are expanded upon. The show takes the one-upping contest along with the schemes and goes absolutely fucking bonkers with them. It's all these things. The characters, the story, the visuals, the music, and the go-wild approach to the genre that make The Great Pretender, well, great. I sincerely recommend this to pretty much anyone, be it an avid anime viewer or someone that's completely new to it. I'd go as far as to say that even a person that never really gave anime as a medium much thought would still thoroughly enjoy this show. So yeah, go and watch it.